obviously we're here in studio, but I want to bring it back to the game and specifically the atmosphere, because we had a couple reports from people that were there on site. One was that the stadium was about 80% full. Now, they did announce, I think, over 20,000.
20,600 and something.
In attendance. Yeah. What does that stadium hold? 22?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Right, 21, 22?
Around there, yeah.
Something like that. We also heard, more anecdotally, that the atmosphere inside the stadium was not great. I'm sure there are some reasons you could share with me about Los Angeles why that's the truth. I would suggest that it has to do with this tournament, with this, not tournament, this event, this Campeones Cup, which I think it's fair to question at this point, especially in light of Conca Champions. Now, we're now going to get even more Liga MX versus MLS. Leagues Cup, which we just finished up and was every bit of Liga MX against every bit of MLS, stuff you know you didn't need. On top of that, we got U.S.-Mexico and friendlies.
Open Cup.
Gold Cup.
Say Open Cup.
Nations League. Do we get U.S. versus Mexico in Open Cup?
No. Just games saturating the calendar.
Well, but my point here is that Campeones Cup specifically, with everything else like it, what's the point of it anymore? You know, is it still necessary?
It's not, and I'll go back to what I was saying at Open Cup, because you saw MLS games today, you saw Open Cup games, we've seen Leagues Cup recently, we've seen Champions Cup or CCL, CONCACAF Champions League. If you look at LAFC's schedule, LAFC would have just played 8 games in 30 days, a span, right? And if you look at Tigres' schedule, it's 6 games in 20 days. Those are a lot of games. Now add in, Seb, the FIFA fixture dates. We're seeing this at the world's level with the elite in the Premier League and Pep Guardiola talking about how his players are dropping like flies and it's impossible to keep up.
I think there's
it's the same thing when you add these cup fixtures to it.
There's a key difference here. Pep Guardiola has literally a blank check to go out and spend and build a team as deep as he needs. Now,
not as deep. Did you see them today against Newcastle? It's not as deep. No.
Very different than what MLS is doing. And what's happening in MLS...
But they're suffering the same way. Now imagine in this region of the world is what I'm trying to tell you.
Right, and so that's why I'm saying, if you think about LAFC, they played 44. This was their 44th game this year. I think last year in totality they played 40, 41.
Right.
So imagine if they were to make the playoffs and go on a run. They could play almost 60 games. I mean, this is, especially now with a 3-game playoff series. So we have an incredible amount of games, and you have rosters, and this is something that LAFC has talked about before. I don't think Steve Cherundolo is talking about it now post-game. He has talked about it in the post-game of defeats, and I've been critical of him for it because you don't want to hear it after a loss. Right. But it is difficult for MLS teams to build a roster that then can compete across a Leagues Cup, and when you add Open Cup, now you can add it because now that is the MLS responsibility. That is too much, and I think the nice thing about this is that it was a one-off shot to get the best of Mexico against the best of MLS, but we now have that with Leagues Cup.
Yeah, and in some cases, and Mexican teams experienced it in Leagues Cup, the travel that is within the United States is pretty bad, right?
Right.
People don't realize it. They just think you're on a charter flight. They're professionals. They should get used to it. It's very difficult changing time zones, East Coast to West Coast, changing playing surfaces, grass to turf, changing temperatures, a dry 60 to a humid 100.
Back in Mexico, what's the reaction to this tonight, you think? On ESPN Deportes, what are they saying about this tournament?
Well, I can tell you from just being on social media right before we started this show that a lot of my our colleagues south of the border are celebrating this. Like, this is what happened. This is what happens when it's a one-off. They're saying order is restored. They're playing or leaning into that card.